If you've ever thought about becoming a freelance editor, but wondered, do I really have what it takes? This week's episode will change your mind. My guest, Katherine Wiley, is a former academic who made the leap into full-time freelance editing, and she's thriving. In this episode, she shares why faculty members are uniquely qualified to be excellent editors, even if they don't realize it yet. We discuss why your academic skills, like writing, research, and attention to detail, make you perfectly suited for scholarly editing, the mindset shift that helps faculty transition from undervalued academics to confident business owners, and Katherine's real talk about leaving academia behind, the challenges, the rewards, and why she'll never look back. If you've been craving more freedom, flexibility, and financial stability, this episode will show you how freelance editing can give you all three, while still allowing you to use your hard-earned academic skills. I hope this conversation with Katherine inspires you to consider the possibilities beyond academia and to recognize just how valuable your skills already are. Welcome to Leaving Academia, Becoming a Freelance Editor, the podcast. I'm your host, Paulina Cossette. In 2019, I was a political science professor who was fed up with the stress and hostility of academia, not to mention the low pay. I left my tenure-track job and went from barely surviving to thriving as a freelance academic editor. Today, I own Acadia Editing Services, an editing and coaching business that brings in 6 figures a year. In this podcast, I'll discuss the challenges of academia, what academic editing involves, and what life as a freelancer looks like. If you're willing to jump outside your comfort zone, it is possible to find joy, true flexibility, and a profitable and rewarding career as an academic editor. Thanks for listening. Well, hi, Katherine. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Paulina. I'm looking forward to talking with you.
So you are a former academic turned freelance editor, and you have a lovely business website. I was looking at it earlier, Goldenrod Editorial, right? And
yes, thank you.
I'm so happy to have you on today to talk about your journey out of academia and into editing and how you built your business. So let's start at the beginning. What did you do as an academic and what led you towards editing?
Yeah, so I got my PhD in anthropology, and after a year as a postdoc, I landed a tenure-track job at a small regional liberal arts school out in Washington State. And, at that school, it's small, right? So I was teaching lots of things: anthropology, global studies, gender studies, writing, African studies, kind of everything. And I was there for 7 years. So I got tenure and then ended up leaving during my sabbatical year. I can talk more specifically about that in a minute. But I'll say honestly, it was like being a faculty member was hard for me pretty much right from the get-go. And that was due, at the time, I thought that was due to the fact that when I arrived at that school in 2014, it had a financial crisis, and that kind of continued throughout my whole time there. I know a lot of your listeners are probably at schools that are also facing financial challenges. This certainly wasn't unique to that institution. And what that meant was we had, in the middle of my time there, a round of layoffs of faculty. Near the end, there's another round of layoffs. That's kind of how I ended up leaving. I'll talk more about that in a minute. And then in the middle, lots of staff being laid off the whole time and just a real financial crunch. So what that meant was that it really pitted faculty against each other, departments and programs against each other, and it led to a really tense environment, right? And a resource poor environment where there wasn't a lot of funding to do creative work or even support our research. So I was miserable. And during that period, I thought I was mostly miserable because of all that tension and drama. And you're always worried if you're going to lose your job or if your friend is going to lose their job. And ultimately, there was another round of firings that was released. Like they announced they were going to do it right near the start of my sabbatical year after I got tenure. And given all my misery, I decided to take a buyout and leave. Also because I was pretty sure my anthropology department would be cut, since they often are. Ultimately, it was. So probably I would have had to leave anyway. So in a way, my therapist at the time said it was a choice, not choice, right? I was choosing to leave, but kind of knowing I would probably have to. So that's like how I interpreted it at the time. I do think looking back, though, that I was kind of deeply unhappy in other ways that I wasn't acknowledging as much, because there was such a focus on this financial trauma or whatever that was going on. And I was talking to a friend maybe a year or so ago about leaving academia. And I said, it's funny. I don't miss the teaching. I don't miss the research. And I don't miss the service. And she said, Katherine, that's like literally everything. That's the whole job. And so I now, in like hindsight, after processing and things, I think there are a lot of things about all the aspects of a faculty position that weren't my favorite thing in the world. Just some examples. I'm an introvert. So while I was a good teacher and I think I did a good job in the classroom, it was hard for me to have to be in front of people all the time. I didn't get a lot of energy from that the way some of my more extroverted colleagues and friends did. I found anthropological research, which involves field work and going far away often, stressful and challenging, although I liked the writing part and the analysis part, but the research itself was hard. And then service, while there were some aspects of service I really loved, a lot of service was like sitting in boring meetings and getting involved in making plans and things that you felt would probably never come to fruition. And I only saw more of that on my horizon as I became an associate professor. So I think I was primed to leave and was kind of not acknowledging how deeply the position wasn't really right for me. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a couple of things that that come to mind for me as you were talking. One is the fact that there are budget crises. Obviously, there are more than just budget crises now, but there were budget crises in, after COVID. But there were like budget crises long before COVID. I mean, I started teaching around the same time you did. And it's like colleges around the country, with few exceptions, have been facing that struggle for a decade or more. And it's like this problem that just never goes away. And now, of course, is really getting worse. But it's hard for me to imagine if I had stayed, like continuing to face that constant uncertainty, and which totally makes sense why I felt anxious all the time,
Me too. Absolutely.
And you also mentioned being an introvert, and I'm not really an introvert because I like interacting with people, but I'm highly sensitive, where I feel like it just stresses out my nervous system. Like a day of teaching is so exhausting to me, and I have to go home and just sit in a room and be quiet, and so I think that I've thought a lot about over the years about like, why do certain people enjoy academia and other people don't? And I think that's probably a key to it, is like, there are those of us who give so much of ourselves, but it really just drains us, and, ruins the experience. Even though we like teaching per se, it's just so exhausting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one thing, because I was thinking about this and preparing to talk to you. I think in graduate school, there's not a lot of talk about that, like what personality types might be best suited to this kind of work, or lifestyles or whatever. And it's just, you're sort of just taught, if you can land a tenure track job, like that's the best thing in the world, and you're so lucky and you should just be so happy. And I think that message, and me feeling like, oh, wow, I'm so lucky to have this job. And my partner is also an academic who has not landed a tenure track job. So I literally was like living with someone, right, who wanted this thing. So I understood how elusive that can be. But then it was hard for me to step back and say, but maybe you don't want it, right? Like maybe it's not right for you, even though everyone's been telling you this is like the best thing in the world. And so I think that was one reason why it took me a while to kind of trust myself and say, you know what, like it's not right for me, and that's okay. That doesn't mean I'm a failure or something. It just means I want to do something else.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I remember there was no preparation for us whatsoever in anything other than like writing and research and publishing. There was no explanation of the day number one, you show up to your new faculty orientation, and they're talking about committee service and all this stuff, and I'm going, what's a committee? Like what do you mean? Like, we have faculty meetings. Okay, that makes sense. There's department meetings. That makes sense. But like, what do I do? What's expected of me? And I think grad students largely are just totally underprepared. Because and then there's the lifestyle stuff, like you were saying, like I remember my first tenure track job was in a city that I hated, that I would have never chosen to live in, but I was pushed by my mentors to take it because it's a tenure track job, and that's what you're supposed to do. So yeah, I've heard from a lot of people that there's conflict between the kind of life you want to have and the kind of life that you're supposed to want to have, with the tenure track jobs.
Definitely.
But so
I also think for grad students, let me just one last thing. Like, I think your faculty, you're usually at a Research 1 institution. Of course, as a grad student, your faculty are used to what it's like being an R1 professor. And of course, that comes with its own stresses and challenges, but they cannot prepare you. Most of us end up at like small regional liberal arts schools or under-resourced schools. And that's a very different experience, right, than what our mentors have, most of them, ever experienced.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the demands for research at liberal arts colleges have been increasing. So it's not just like you have to be a good teacher like it used to be. Now you have to do everything, which is just impossible. Yeah.
Totally.
So how did you find editing?
So, yeah, it's funny. I had been editing one way or another for a long time, but kind of hadn't realized it. I took a meandering path to grad school. So I was a journalist for a while, and so I was a writer, but editing is part of that. Then I did the Peace Corps. I taught English in Mauritania for a bunch of years, so not exactly editing, but involved with like language and words. Then I went and worked in nonprofits for a while and did a lot of editing of reports and newsletters and just sort of documents we produced as part of my job. And then I finally ended up in grad school, but was editing along the way. I edited my advisor's first book. I would, read and edit peers' work, but I wasn't seeing it as editing. It was just like exchanges with colleagues. And so then when I decided to leave, and my deciding to leave was like pretty abrupt because of suddenly being offered this buyout package. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I thought maybe I would want to go back and work in nonprofits again. I was trying to figure stuff out. So I started just reading mostly blog posts by anthropology PhDs, seeing like, what did they do after leaving academia, and developmental editing came up. And just in case there are listeners who don't know what that is, developmental editors focus on big picture issues related to work. So they help authors think through things like argument, structure, organization, narrative flow, and help them strengthen those aspects of their manuscripts. And so I started reading about editing, and I just felt like it clicked. It excited me. And it's funny because I didn't actually know about developmental editing until after my book I wrote as a faculty member came out. And I remember seeing a Facebook post maybe in like 2019 or something, a couple years before I left, where someone was like, can anyone recommend developmental editors? And I remember someone else asked, like, what is that? And the person said what I just said. And I remember thinking like, oh my God, that exists? Like, I did not know that existed. And maybe if I had, it could help me write a better book. So I think I was lucky because it just felt like it clicked, and it's worked out. But I think, again, looking back, I can see that my skills aligned well with editing, right? I already had a lot of experience in formally editing for really over 20 years. I loved reading and writing. And then I'd been through the publishing process in academia, so that gave me like some insider knowledge about that. And so I just started, I was on sabbatical, so I was pretty lucky. And then I got unemployment for some months after that. So I had time to kind of explore and start learning more about developmental editing and seeing if it was something I actually wanted to do. But I haven't looked back. It's been a really good transition for me.
So what were your first steps when you decided, okay, I want to start a business? How did you do that?
So I think I kind of had two phases. And again, I had the luxury of some time, which helped with that. So first, I worked on figuring out if I actually did want to start the business, like if I did want to be a developmental editor. And so that phase included reading a lot. So I read like Scott Norton's book on developmental editing, a bunch of other books on editing. Aaron Brenner has a book which wasn't out then, but is now, right, about actually starting an editing business. So I would have read that if I could have. And then I also did some informational interviews with other developmental editors, academic editors, to hear more about what their jobs were like, if it might be a good match for me. So kind of a lot of research. And as I got a little and I kept feeling like, yeah, this feels right. And I also was lucky because my husband, who was also at the institution that was laying everybody off, managed to get a contingent position at a place where contingents are unionized. So he has a good salary and healthcare and stuff. So I felt like, okay, this is a moment when I can maybe take a chance on something like this, right? Because I have healthcare and so on. So I did that phase, and I did decide I wanted to do like a little bit more training because while in a sense I'd done developmental editing, I still felt like I wanted to know more about like what it actually looks like in a professional practice. So what kind of materials do editors share? Because most developmental editing involves like making comments in the margins, using like comments in Microsoft Word. But then most editors write like an editorial letter, an editorial memo, kind of summarizing major issues and providing pathways forward to authors. And I just felt kind of abstract for me. So I ended up taking a developmental editing class as part of the University of Chicago's editing certificate. And that was really helpful in getting feedback on my work, seeing authentic materials, talking to other editors about what this thing looked like. So that helped me gain confidence. And then I got more into the actual setting up of the business. So I did things like I did decide to register and become a LLC for a variety of reasons. You don't have to do that, but I think I was worried at the time about my credentials. I think like more than I needed to, that I wouldn't look legitimate or something. And so I felt actually being able to say it's like a business would be helpful. I set up the website. So I took a Squarespace like self-guided class to help me learn how to do Squarespace, which has been super intuitive and a nice platform. So I did that work. I did a little bit of pro bono editing for friends, partly to get referrals and testimonials from my website, but also to just get a better sense of like, how long is it taking me to do this work? Like, what should I charge? Stuff like that. And then the final, and I think the most important step for me was I just compiled a huge list of anybody I could think of who I had encountered in academia ever. So, obviously like graduate student friends and faculty colleagues, but like anyone I'd been on a panel with at a conference, people I published in an edited volume with, just whoever. And so when I was ready to launch, I sent individual emails to all of those people saying what my business was, asking them to consider hiring me or recommending me to others. And that helped so much because some of those people did hire me and others passed my name along. And so that just kind of got the business going. And I've been lucky, knock on wood, I think partly because I was in academia for 7 years, so had a pretty decent network, that I have had a pretty steady business since I started. So that was great.
That's awesome. If anybody is listening and thinking about getting into editing and wants to figure out how to make this decision, go back and listen to Katherine's answer there again, because you highlighted so many steps that I agree with 100%. From, start by reading books about what is it like to be an editor. In addition to the ones that you mentioned, which I'll link to, there's also The Art of Academic Editing by Kara Jordan and Leslie Castro Woodhouse. Leslie was on the podcast in one of the first episodes. I think that's a great overview of each chapter is on a different type of editing or coaching. And so that gives people sort of the taste of what it's like to be an academic editor in particular. Then you mentioned informational interviews. I think that's an awesome idea. And I always tell people that those of us who left academia love to talk about it. And we're always happy if somebody messages me, even if they don't want to join my program or anything like that, they just want to know, like, what is it like to leave academia? I love talking to them because I know how nice it is to be out. And I want to help people do that, if that's what they're looking for. So yeah, totally email people, connect with them on LinkedIn, just say like, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. Would you have coffee with me on Zoom for 20 minutes or something, and people are totally going to be willing to do that. The third thing you mentioned was doing some pro bono work for testimonials. I think that's a great idea, either to do it for free or in exchange for the testimonial, or to charge like a discounted rate or something like that, depending on who you're connecting with. And then the last thing I want to highlight is you mentioned creating this list of people that you had some kind of connection to. This, what I would call that like a warm list, right? It's instead of cold emailing people, you're essentially warm emailing them and saying, hey, this is what I'm doing now. Do you need an editor, or can you share my information with somebody? So that's really awesome advice. Tell us about how you progressed from there. So it sounds like you were getting a lot of your initial work was from these warm connections and then also probably referrals. Were there other ways that you were marketing yourself, or was it mainly all by word of mouth?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I was doing some other marketing. I talked to another editor. One thing that's good about doing those informational interviews, and one aside there's a nice website called Editing After Academia that has a bunch of profiles of editors who are willing to do these informational interviews. So check that out if you want to talk to people. But anyway, one nice thing about doing those was people give you good tips. And I remember one person said, do marketing that like feels authentic to you, because otherwise it's hard to maintain it. So think about like what you like doing and try to market yourself in that way. And I'm by no means an expert on marketing, but that has worked for me. So I started a blog because I like writing. And so that was one way I marketed myself. And the blog focuses on academic editing, but also academic life. I have a bunch of posts on leaving academia, for example, or navigating publishing, things like this. And so I use that partly in that email. Like I had an early blog on what is developmental editing, because a lot of people don't know. And I linked to that in those initial emails. But I also hoped when people would go to the website, it just gives a sense of like, oh yeah, this person knows what they're talking about. So I still, in the beginning, I was blogging like at least twice a month. Now I've dropped it back to about once a month, but I still do that. And I post my blog on LinkedIn and Blue Sky and Facebook. And so I think that's a way to just like stay in people's orbits, to remind people this is what I'm doing. I also do some marketing. I hadn't used LinkedIn before becoming an editor, but I found that to be a nice platform. I do feel like a lot of the people I'm interacting with on LinkedIn are other editors. So, I don't feel like there are quite as many faculty members, but actually I've learned that editors are kind and generous and often have too much work. So I've definitely gotten referrals from editors who've gotten to know me on LinkedIn, and I've referred people to editors I've gotten to know on LinkedIn. So kind of marketing in that way has been nice. And yeah, I think what I've learned from this is just kind of like keeping your business in people's minds means that, for an example, as I run these writing groups now, and someone registered in this latest round who I graduated from college with 25 years ago, have not talked to her since then, but we're somehow connected on Facebook. And she was like, oh yeah, I've been like noticing that you have this business. And I finally decided to do this writing group with you 4 years later or whatever. So, It's hard for me. I haven't done a lot of studies on my marketing to know exactly like where people are coming from, but I do think that's been helpful in just remaining in folks' minds and so on. I'd say now though, most of my clients come like directly from referrals from past clients. So that's been helpful. And then I don't do this as much now, but in the beginning, I would kind of remind clients of that. So when I would send people like a finished project, I would say at the end, like, hey, if you don't mind, like, please consider referring me to others you know who might be interested, because that's the main way I grow my business. And so I found like doing just some marketing like that, like reminding people of things they could do to help support my business was also probably helpful.
Yeah, that's some more great advice, I think. A simple thing like adding a line at the end of that email saying, would you mind letting people know about me, or sharing my website or something, is because they don't think about that. I found, clients are naturally and understandably focused on their work and their deadlines, and they're not always thinking, how can I help this person, right? But if you just add that little line and you plant the seed in their head, I think, it might come up in conversation, or they'll send an email to somebody or whatever. And so just making that very small suggestion is an easy way to kind of plant the seed and get them thinking about it. The other thing you said is do marketing that feels authentic to you. And I think I'm going to quote you when I'm teaching the new editors in my program and becoming an academic editor. I'm always, it is uncomfortable to market ourselves. I think as academics, we spend so much time in this like defensive posture, saying, oh, look at me, I've published, I know all these things. And, you feel, but it comes from a place of defensiveness, of like having to prove ourselves to department chairs or tenure committees or whatever. And when you're marketing yourself as a business, though, I think we feel like we're being salesy or, weird or creepy or something, but it's very much about, I have something that can help you and I'm here to help you. And I think like creating content for Facebook or Instagram just for the sake of creating content can like draw on that salesiness of marketing. Whereas what you're talking about with, okay, I just wrote a blog post, I'm writing an explanation of what is developmental editing or how can you work with me or whatever. And then sharing that on LinkedIn or even on Facebook or Instagram, it feels a bit more natural, I think, for us. We're not being salesy. We're just, hey, I wrote this thing, check it out. And, as you've clearly shown, it's very effective. So staying in people's orbit, keeping yourself like top of mind, letting them know that you exist. Those are all great suggestions.
I think one other thing that's helped me with the marketing, like the feeling of like not wanting to be creepy, is one thing is, as you know, from doing this job, is like not everyone can afford these services, right? Especially people like my old research budget was $1,000 a year. And so that was usually like part of the conference. Like if I had hired an editor, it would have had to be out of pocket. I may not have been able to do that. So one thing that's helped me with the marketing is I feel like it's also kind of a little bit of a political act, like writing this blog. I hope that I'm able, it's not the same as hiring a developmental editor, but if I write a post on like developmental editing your own work, I'm helping to give people some skills that might let them edit their own work in a different way or think about their own work differently. And so I think it's kind of like doing two things. It's marketing and it's providing leveling the playing field a little bit. And I think that's what a lot of editors are doing on LinkedIn and so on, right? They're sharing information that's useful, whether or not you hire them. And so that's one way that because I've absolutely felt that like, ew, gross, I shouldn't be marketing and it's too pushy. But I think being able to think of it in that way made it easier for me and more in line with like my business values and my own personal values.
Yeah, I love that. I think, you're providing information and value to your audience, and it's normal to expect that only a small percentage of like 5 or 10% of our whole audience is going to actually hire us. But we can still demonstrate our value, demonstrate our knowledge and skills to those people who then hire us while also still serving the group that yeah, because I didn't have research budgets either. I could have never hired, certainly as a grad student, I never could have hired an editor, but that's a great way to look at it. So you mentioned the writing workshops and stuff. How did you get the idea to start sort of expanding your business in that way?
Yeah, so I've expanded my business in two ways since I started. I started as a developmental editor. That's pretty much what I was exclusively doing. But since then, I've started offering what I call developmental coaching services. So kind of the same thing I do as an editor, but talking about it rather than putting that on paper. So talking through author's argument and structure and the conceptual framework of their pieces with them. So that's the first thing I added. And the second thing is these writing groups, scholarly writing groups, which now are 8-week sessions for generally PhDs, sometimes like ABDs who are in a faculty position. And those provide like quiet writing time, but also I start each one with a writing exercise. So it gives people a chance to like focus on audience or argument or other big elements of academic writing. And then we have kind of chances for the scholars to talk together and final reflection and so on. So the coaching came first, and that happened kind of organically just because some of my authors wanted to be meeting with me to talk about their writing. And I realized, oh, this is like a need that people have and something that I can do. I'm not like trained as a broader sort of life coach, so I don't offer that kind of coaching. That's why I'm trying to keep it kind of narrow and in my lane. But I also found, while I'm an introvert, I really like connecting with people one-on-one. So editing felt like a little bit lonely. And so adding coaching has been really nice. And I especially like it. I have a lot of clients now who I edit for and do coaching with them. And so I feel like we've been able to develop a deeper, kind of more personal relationship, which I think actually makes my editing for them stronger because I have a better sense of like what's going on and what they're anxious about and whatever. And then hopefully it also helps support them more. One other thing I'll say about that, one thing I didn't expect in going into this work was that fact that like suddenly you're working with all these people who, like you as a former faculty member, are anxious, often feeling lonely, feeling marginalized in the academy or whatever. And you get to be on their team and get to help them and support them and do this kind of work that is often missing in institutions. So that's been positive, and the coaching has helped with that. And then not so long after that, I think it was really my second year, I started doing the writing groups. And that was for a couple of reasons. One, I felt like a lot of the people I worked with felt like they needed more accountability. It was just like hard for them to get writing done. And some of them were doing coaching with me to get the accountability, which is great. But I felt like maybe there's a way to get that without like having to invest quite as much money. Like not everybody can afford to meet with a coach weekly or something like that. So that was one thing. I saw a need for these groups. I had also done a lot of writing groups myself in graduate school and felt like they worked. But when I was a faculty member, I felt like it was hard to make them happen. That was partly because like I always thought maybe I should organize a writing group with people at my institution. But then that comes with all the institutional baggage, especially at a small place. And I don't know, we might have just evolved into complaining about the financial situation again. And then, you know, you can do it virtually with people from elsewhere, but you have to find enough people, you have to find the right people and so on. So I felt like, I bet there are people out there who want this, but like don't want to start it, or they have and it hasn't worked. And some institutions offer this for free, but like a lot don't. Yeah, so those were, and also I deeply believe in community. And I think a lot of academics, I certainly did, feel lonely, like they feel like they're not connecting with other faculty elsewhere as much as they might want. They feel alone in their anxieties around writing. So I felt like this would be a good way to help address that, right? And give people some built-in community who they could connect with, and maybe even carry those relationships into the future. And it was nice for me to, again, I don't really miss teaching, but this just like scratches the teaching itch like enough, but with a very engaged group of people. And, you know, so yeah, I've liked, one thing I love about running my own business is you can be creative in your business. And I've seen that in yours, right? Like I was looking at your website this morning, you clearly offer like a range of services now. And so I think when I was a faculty member, I sometimes would like come to my dean with like a creative idea that required like just a little bit of money. And the answer was almost always like, that's cool. Sorry. Like we're not going to do that. When here I can come to myself and say, you want to try this thing, Catherine? Like, sure, let's try it. Let's see if it works. So that's been a really positive change for me. And again, like I like this. I don't always have a writing group going. I now do them 3 times a year. So those times a year, it gives like a little bit of different structure to my weeks. But then I can have some like time off from that as well. So again, like just being able to build your business and create the kinds of services you want to create has been really positive for me.
Yeah, I always laugh when people say academia is flexible because it's not at all flexible. You're working, I was working 7 days a week. Like you said, you can be creative and have ideas, and you bring this energy and excitement to your teaching and to your service, but then it often gets shot down. And it's like, I'm doing all the things that you want me to do, but you're telling me no. And so when you're in a business, you can be creative and, you try something and it doesn't work. Who cares? You go and you try something else, and like totally. you get to pick and choose, or maybe it does work and you decide you don't like it. You could still stop, like there's no commitment there. And I agree completely that the coaching type role that we can take on it does fill that itch to still teach and connect with people. But the people on the other side are so much more appreciative of like you and your time. I remember sitting in front of a class of students and there'd be like 2 out of 20 or 25 students who were nodding their heads and listening to you, and everybody else was like totally zoned out. And when I teach in my cohorts of, there's 10 people and like everybody is locked in and engaged. And, if they turn their camera off, they're like, I'm eating lunch. Sorry, I'll turn my camera on when I'm done. Right. And it's just an excitement about learning, and being in a classroom in that sense where everybody wants to be there and everybody wants to learn is so fulfilling.
Definitely.
And I imagine it's similar in the writing groups that, even if you're like co-working or something, it's still being in a space with other people who appreciate you and the knowledge that you're sharing. So
absolutely. It feels powerful, I think, spaces like that. And it's nice that we can create those for people.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you were talking to somebody who was just starting their editing business, or maybe thinking about starting their editing business and doing all this research like you did, what's a couple of pieces of advice that you would give to them, just to sort of like, looking back to kind of help them along?
Yeah, that's, I would say, a couple things. I mean, some of it I've already given. One thing I would say is to not underestimate the skills you already have. Because as I said, I spent a lot of time being like, no one's going to think I'm legitimate and how can I do this? But that was overlooking the fact, as I said, that I've been editing in one way or another for this huge amount of time, that like I was deeply trained as an academic, as a writer and a thinker and so on. So I would say like, don't undervalue the skills you already have. So that doesn't mean like you don't maybe need some training. You probably, most people do, right? And we continue as editors to train like through workshops, webinars, and whatever. But don't feel necessarily like I just need to like, wait till I get like an editing certificate from here and all this stuff. Like you might be able to start sooner. So just sort of try to be more realistic maybe than I was about where you're at. And same if it's like you do need training, right? Like if I wanted to be a copy editor, I would have to get serious training for that. I'm horrible at grammar. I don't know the Chicago manual style. So, and maybe that's something I would also say. You don't have to do every kind of editing. I do think when I started, even though I was kind of zoned in on developmental editing and I also do some line editing, I felt a little like I should be offering a full package. I should be able to copy edit and proofread and do all this stuff. And I mean, some people do everything and that's great. And then maybe you work with a client for more stages than someone else, but it's also totally okay to focus. And a lot of clients are just looking for a developmental editor or just a copy editor or whatever. And I've never had someone say to me, I don't want to work with you because you don't do copy editing too, right? I've had people say, can you recommend a copy editor? And I say yes, and that's fine. So think about where your strengths lie and be okay like leaning into those strengths in determining what kinds of editing you want to do. So that's something else I would say. And then another thing I'd say, when I share my story, I just always want to highlight, like, I had almost a year to like prep starting a business, because again, I was on sabbatical and then I had unemployment. And so a lot of people don't have that luxury. So I would say, like, you don't have to do everything I did to start, right? Like, you don't have to become an LLC right away or ever. Like, a lot of people aren't LLCs, totally fine. You don't have to have a website. I think it probably like helps, but you could have like a really bare bones website, or don't start with it, start slower without a website while you're doing some other job. So kind of assess like where you're at, where your resources at, where your time is at, and so on, and make decisions like that accordingly. And same, I'd say, with like, again, as we talked about, sending out those personal emails to everyone I knew really helped. If you are newer tech, like if that list is smaller for you, you might think about, am I ready to just like launch full time? Or maybe it makes sense to like work part-time somewhere else and do this part-time, or do it, start a little slower. So just, think about your resources, your time, how well situated you are to move forward. I would say. So those are some of the things that come to my mind at that question.
Yeah, that's great advice. What I'm hearing you say is, don't feel like you have to have all the things in place to get started.
To start.
You can have a LinkedIn profile. And I think when I started, I put in my email signature, my name, and the link to my LinkedIn profile before I had a website. And like, it's something there that people can go check you out, And then when you do start the website, just have one page, just something that shows that you are real, and there's a way for them to contact you to prove that you're real. And I get that a lot from a lot of the people in my program, that they're like, oh, I'm trying to finish my website, and, I'm not going to apply somewhere until I get that done. And I'm going, just do it. Just spend 30 minutes this afternoon, finish it, publish it. There you go. It doesn't have to be perfect. Just get it out there. And I think so much about running a business is we learn as we go, like you're never going to know everything about business, no matter how long you've done it. And so you just kind of have to embrace that learn as we go kind of philosophy, and you'll figure it out.
Totally. Yeah. One other thing I would say too is, don't think that your clients will only come from that list of contacts in academia. So like, share broadly that you're starting the business. That's why like Facebook was helpful, because most of my connections on Facebook aren't academics. They're just friends from all. So I've had people be like the guy I did the Peace Corps with told his best friend, who happens to be dating an academic, about but so it's like stuff weird. Or like my stepmom went to like a meeting where some guy next to her was writing a book. So just like spread it widely, and don't be shy about telling people what you do, because often people might not be a faculty member themselves, but they might be like, oh, I know. Or maybe they're writing a book and you decide you want to work with someone who's like not a faculty member and try out like broader nonfiction work or so on. So that's another thing I would tell myself, is just like talk it up to everybody, because you never know where contacts will come from.
Yeah. And I think don't be ashamed, right? Like, I think so many people leave or think about doing something else, and they feel this heavy shame because it's not that tenure track job. Like we were saying at the beginning, I'm supposed to be a professor, and I'm thinking about doing this other thing, and I feel shame, like I'm not good enough because of that. And who cares, man? When you're on your deathbed, are you really going to be thinking, oh my God, I'm not a professor anymore? Or like, oh, I'm so glad I took a vacation every year with my family, like that's what I'm going to be thinking is remembering that. So absolutely.
Yeah, that's funny. When I left, like that, like the fall when I was kind of launching, whenever I'd meet someone and they asked me what I did, I would be like, well, I used to be a faculty member and I'm like trained as an anthropologist, but then I'm like, now I'm an editor. I had this like long thing. And then at some point I stopped and I was like, what am I doing? Like, they don't need to know. I'm an editor. I'm an editor. That's great. And people's reactions to me saying I'm an editor are the same as to when I said I was a faculty member. They're just like, cool, that sounds like a good job, right? So yeah, like getting over that mindset of like, this is a loss, and rather thinking of it as this is a gain and a new moment in life that provides different opportunities. And I will say, I like you saying like you could take a vacation. Everyone says they're worried about leaving academia because of the summers and the flexible schedule. Okay, I worked almost all summer when I was a faculty member in one way or another. I worked over breaks. I tried to limit my work as compared to some people, but I still think I worked like 50 hours a week. Now I take like 6 to 8 weeks off a year. When I'm off, I am truly off. I am not checking email. I'm not communicating with clients. It's a real vacation. I can take those weeks whenever. I'm taking 1 and 2 weeks in like the middle of March, which does not align with spring break or like my old, or whatever. And so I think like, and as you said earlier, I'm not only flexible in like when I work, but also what kind of work I am doing. So I think it's a little bit of a myth that summers and flexibility are so amazing in academia. And I'm sure they are for some people somewhere, like don't work in summer or something. But I haven't really met those faculty members. And that's fine. If you love that schedule, stay in academia. That's awesome. I'm happy for you. But if you're feeling like I am burnt out, I am tired, I have not really taken a true vacation for years, you don't have to live that way. You can choose to live that way, but there are a lot of other career paths that do provide more flexibility and actual vacations, which has been really helpful for my mental health. It's been interesting. My husband has said repeatedly, like, you seem so much happier. Like, basically, he's not saying this explicitly, but I think he's saying it's so much easier to live with you now that you like your job better and you're not angry and stressed and anxious all the time. So
yeah, it's amazing how happy we can be when we don't hate life, right? Like,
yeah, right.
When you don't
and work is a big part of life. Yeah,
when you don't dread going to work every day. Yeah, I remember one day my father-in-law saying to me, and he didn't say this in a mean way. It was very much like I feel sorry for you kind of way. Like, I've never seen you on vacation without your laptop. And I just went, you're right. And now I put that email autoresponder on and I'm gone for 10 days or whatever. Yeah. And I don't check email, and I'll spend a week replying to emails when I get back, but it's better than doing it while I'm gone, and I don't have that guilt anymore of like, feeling guilty for not doing work. So wonderful. Totally. This has been such a great conversation. Thank you so much for joining me and sharing all of this.
So great talking with you. Thanks for doing this and giving us chances to share these stories.
Yeah, absolutely. I love to do it. If people want to work with you, how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, so probably the best place is through my website. So it's goldenrodeditorial.com, and there's a contact me page you can get on there, or you can email me at Katherine@goldenrodeditorial.com. And I'm also on LinkedIn. My name's Katherine Wiley, so you can find me on there, and I'd love to connect on LinkedIn as well.
Perfect. Yeah, everybody go to Katherine's website because it's absolutely beautiful and really well done in terms of like marketing and, explaining how you can help people and all of that. So thanks again, Katherine.
Thanks so much, Paulina. Nice talking with you.
If you're unhappy in academia and you think you might be a good editor or writing coach, check out my course, Becoming an Academic Editor. This digital course is paired with a 12-week group coaching program to support you through your decision to leave academia or not, and to start building a profitable and rewarding academic editing business. Learn more by going to acadiaediting.com/become an editor. Thanks again for listening. I'll see you next time.